It begins with a color you almost never see where it matters most. Walk through any city in the world. Look up at the flags. Government buildings, embassies, schools, stadiums. Red, blue, white, green, yellow, they're everywhere. Familiar, predictable, almost comforting in their repetition. Now, try to find purple. Not a shade, not a hint, a real, deliberate, unmistakable purple. You'll notice something strange. It's missing. Not just rare, not just uncommon, absent. And that absence is not an accident, because for nearly 3,000 years, purple was not a color, it was a warning. It meant power you could not question, authority you could not challenge, a line you could not cross. And if you did, you didn't pay a fine, you disappeared. Long before empires fell, before flags were stitched, before nations even existed as we understand them, there was a coastline in the Eastern Mediterranean where this story truly begins. A place where the air itself carried the scent of something rotten and valuable at the same time. There, workers stood knee-deep in piles of broken shells under a brutal sun. Thousands upon thousands of them, crushing, extracting, repeating the same motion until their hands stopped feeling like hands. Inside each shell was a creature no bigger than your thumb, a sea snail. Harmless, silent, forgettable. Except for one thing. Hidden inside its body was a tiny gland, and inside that gland was a substance so rare, so difficult to process, that it would become the most valuable color in human history. To create a single gram of usable dye, it took roughly 12,000 of those snails. 12,000 lives for a color that could barely cover the head of a pin. The process was slow, precise, and unbearable. The extracted fluid had to be left in salt water for days, then heated carefully. Too much heat, and the color died. Too little, and it never formed. The smell was so overpowering that entire workshops were forced outside city limits. But when it worked, when everything aligned perfectly, the result was something almost unnatural. A deep, rich purple that didn't fade in sunlight. A color that seemed to hold on to light instead of reflecting it. A color that looked permanent. And that permanence changed everything. Because once something becomes that rare, that difficult, that expensive, it stops being decoration. It becomes control. Rulers began to understand something subtle but powerful. You don't need to control everything people see. You only need to control what they cannot have. And so purple was removed from the world of ordinary people. Not gradually, not casually, but by law. In ancient Persia, the king declared that only he could wear garments dyed in this color. Not because it looked better, not because it was fashionable, but because it separated him from everyone else. It turned power into something visible, something undeniable. Alexander the Great adopted it. Then Rome took it further. In Rome, rules around purple weren't suggestions. They were enforced with precision. Senators could wear a thin stripe. Generals could wear it briefly during triumphs. But a full garment? That belonged to one man, the emperor. And by the 4th century, even that limited access began to shrink. Because power, once concentrated, rarely loosens its grip. Eventually, the message became brutally simple. Purple is not for you. And if you forget that, we will remind you. Permanently. Imagine that for a moment. Not a symbol, not an idea, a color. Something as simple as a color, carrying the weight of life and death. Because when an emperor wore purple, he wasn't making a fashion choice. He was making a statement. A claim that his authority came from somewhere beyond human reach, that he did not answer to the people, that he stood above them. Chosen, elevated, untouchable. Purple wasn't just rare, it was sacred. And nowhere was this taken further than in the Byzantine Empire. Here, purple became more than a restriction, it became identity itself. Emperors signed decrees in purple ink, their halls were draped in purple fabric, their presence was surrounded by it, as if the color itself reinforced their legitimacy. And then, there were the children. Those born to a reigning emperor were given a title that carried enormous weight. Born in the purple. Not metaphorically, literally. They were born in a specific chamber lined with purple stone inside the imperial palace, a room designed to ensure that their first breath was taken in the presence of the color that defined power. Their right to rule wasn't argued. It was assumed, because purple had already spoken for them. For centuries, this system held. Empires rose and fell, borders shifted, armies marched, but the meaning of purple remained untouched until 1453, the year everything changed. When Constantinople fell, it wasn't just a political collapse, it was a rupture in continuity, a break in a chain that had stretched across centuries. The center of purple production disappeared. The knowledge, carefully guarded, rarely written, passed through controlled hands, was lost. Not slowly, not piece by piece, all at once. And just like that, the most powerful color in the world vanished. For over 400 years, true purple ceased to exist. People tried to recreate it. They used plants, minerals, combinations of dyes, but nothing matched the original. The substitutes faded. They lacked depth. They lacked permanence. They lacked authority. And maybe, in a strange way, that was the point. Because without the original, the symbol weakened. Without the symbol, the message blurred. And for a while, it seemed like the world had quietly moved on. Until an accident brought it all back. In 1856, an 18-year-old student was working on a completely unrelated problem. He wasn't trying to recreate history. He wasn't searching for lost knowledge. He was trying to make medicine. The experiment failed. At least, that's what it looked like at first. The mixture turned into a dark, unremarkable sludge. Useless, worthless, something to be cleaned and forgotten. But when he rinsed the flask with alcohol, something unexpected happened. The liquid transformed into a vivid, striking purple. Not dull, not faded, alive. In that moment, without intending to, he had done something extraordinary. He had recreated the impossible, not through ancient methods, not through rare resources, but through chemistry, through industrial waste, through something the world had in abundance. Within months, the most expensive color in human history became one of the cheapest. Factories produced it at scale, cities embraced it, fashion exploded with it. For the first time in thousands of years, ordinary people could wear the color that had once been forbidden. The barrier was gone. The cost was gone. The restriction was gone. And yet, something didn't change. Because while purple flooded clothing, art, and design, it never made its way onto flags, not in any meaningful way, not in the one place where color becomes identity. At first glance, that might seem like coincidence. After all, many flags existed long before synthetic dyes. Traditions are slow to change. Symbols carry history. But then, the world changed. Empires collapsed, new nations formed, entire regions redrew their identities from scratch. Between the 20th century's wars, revolutions, and independence movements, dozens of countries had the opportunity to choose new flags, new colors, new meanings. They weren't bound by tradition, they were defining it, and they chose everything except purple. Red for sacrifice, blue for justice, green for land or faith, white for peace. Colors that spoke of relationships between people and power. But purple, the color that once declared absolute authority, it was ignored, skipped, left behind. even when there was no cost, no limitation, no practical reason to avoid it, except one: memory. Because symbols don't disappear when the systems that created them collapse. They linger, quietly, subconsciously, shaping decisions without announcing themselves. For 3,000 years, purple meant one thing: power without consent, authority without negotiation, a hierarchy that could not be questioned. And when modern nations began to define themselves, especially those built on ideas of representation, equality, and shared power, that message became incompatible. You can't build a republic on a symbol that says the ruler stands above the ruled. You can't promote democracy with a color that denies it. So even without discussion, even without coordination, the world made a decision not to use it. One country tried, briefly. In the early 20th century, a new government introduced a flag with a bold purple stripe. It wasn't random, it was intentional, a statement, a reversal of meaning, a color once reserved for rulers, given to the people. But it didn't last. Within less than a decade, that flag disappeared, replaced, removed, erased from official use. And when the country later rebuilt itself, the purple didn't return. It remained where it has stayed ever since, outside the lines. Because even today, in a world saturated with color, where design is limitless and symbolism is constantly evolving, purple remains absent from the one place where meaning matters most. Not because we can't use it, but because we remember what it meant, even if we don't realize it. That's the strange part. No treaty was signed, no global agreement was made, no meeting where leaders decided together to avoid a single color. And yet the result is the same: a silent pattern, repeated across continents, cultures, and centuries, a shared understanding that never needed to be spoken. Because some symbols are too powerful to repurpose, too heavy to redefine, too honest to ignore. So they're not destroyed, they're not banned, they're simply left out. And that absence tells a story about how deeply meaning can embed itself into something as simple as color. How history doesn't just live in books or monuments, but in choices we don't even question, in patterns we follow without realizing, in things we avoid without knowing why. Because every flag is a statement, a declaration of identity, a message to the world. And sometimes, what's missing from that message says more than what's there. So the next time you see a flag, any flag, look at the colors, not just for what they show, but for what they refuse to include. Because somewhere in that absence, a 3,000-year-old memory is still alive, quiet, invisible, but impossible to erase. And still, after all this time, no nation has dared to claim it.